This is not really a talk or a speech or anything. It's just a collection of impressions about what is going on in the world and how important it is, therefore, that India, United States, the UK, and other countries come together in the sense to collectively confront what is going on in the world. You know, I mean, apart from the fact that we have around 380 million Indians who speak some kind of English or the other, I mean, it's our kind of English. Kerala know what the correct English is, and sadly, my accent is a Bombay accent. It's one of the worst accents in India. You know, everybody laughs at a Bombay accent, and I can't seem to shake it off. I've had my school education in Bombay, I've had my university education in Bombay, I've had to sadly spend more than a few years of my life there, so I'm stuck with this terrible Bombay accent. And it's a very funny accent. I mean, if you ever go to Bombay, for example, and people ask you that, would you like a snake to eat? You know, please don't refuse, because they mean snack. People from this part of the world who really don't speak too much of English, when they come to my part of the world, they sometimes don't understand the very good English that we speak, you know. So I'd just like to say that, I mean, if you look at the statistics in India, you'll find that about 8 to 9% of Indians speak English. The actual number is much more. For example, in our census, of course, I don't know how many people here will think that I'm speaking, the language I'm speaking is English, but in our country's census, I don't speak English, because we use the state language, the mother tongue, so to speak. And our mother tongue is Malayalam. It's one of around 29 languages in India that are officially recognized. And we have 140 languages that are unofficially recognized. So we have quite a bit of languages. But we are not classified. Neither my wife and I are classified as speaking a word of English in our census. So the actual figure is nearly 400 million. And for quite a long time, actually, English was associated with something with foreigners and the foreign country. And therefore, many governments, they prevented the students who were in public schools, and governments, not public schools, but what I would say is what we call public sector schools, that is government schools, from learning English. In Bengal, in Tamil Nadu, in various other parts of the country, the politicians said that, look, we'll send our children to study in English medium schools. We'll send them to study in Australia or Canada or the US. But the people of this country who can't afford that kind of education, we won't teach them English at all. Well, Bengal was at one time a country with a state with a very, very strong intellectual tradition. Unfortunately, that's got a very heavily stunted because of the fact that many Bengalis were simply unable to speak English, and many people in Tamil Nadu also were unable to speak English. I'm happy to say that my little state of Kerala, I mean, we really are not very, you know, we're not very, I mean, very strongly, we don't feel very strongly about things, so we didn't feel very strongly about having English continue. So we allowed English to continue. So we are doing rather better because of that. So for us, it's been a means of advancement. Because obviously if you know English, you've got access to a much bigger database than if you don't know English. And it's very important, I would say, in national security and various other things, that kind of a database, that kind of is very, very important. I'll tell you how, for example, when referring to a country that I go to very often, is China. And we found from the data that a lot more Chinese are now learning Arabic. They're going to the Middle East, they're working there, and they're picking up Arabic. Now you have Chinese in Xinjiang, for example, who are mostly Muslim. You have people like the Hui in China who are mostly Muslim. But almost none of them could speak Arabic. Today, because of the migration to the Gulf and a lot of Chinese activities in the Gulf and working there, a lot more people are speaking Arabic. Now, what's the significance of that? The significance of that is if you know only Mandarin, for example, you get a certain amount of knowledge out of that Mandarin. If you go to Arabic, you have any number of books, any number of articles, any number of writings in Arabic, which say that any country, for example, where alcohol is served, is a country where the devil, frankly, feels completely at home. Any country where, pork, for example, is consumed, is a country where the devil is absolutely delighted to be present. And any country where the women dress in anything barring a complete, an overcoat, is a country which again the devil is extremely happy about. So China is a country where the women dress reasonably, like the way they dress anywhere else. China is a country the people absolutely adore, pork. They love pork. For a vegetarian like me, it's a serious problem being in China, because even on the vegetable they sprinkle little bits of pork, and they say that after all, what's wrong with that? It's only pork. And in China, I'm happy to say that there's a fair amount of alcohol consumption. At least in my case, I like a little bit of wine in the evening. I can't, not more than that. But I certainly wouldn't like to go to a place like Kuwait or whatever where there's absolutely no wine that's legally available. Or in my country, the state of Gujarat. So you're taught to hate, in a sense, your own country. You're taught to believe that things that have been seen as normal in a different catechetism, in a different curriculum, so to speak, are regarded as evil and as devilish when you go there. So it does make a huge sociological difference. It makes a huge difference in the way you react to societies, in the way you react to other people, depending on the language that you speak. Because unfortunately what has happened is, since 1979, in the case of Arabic, what has happened is that you had a situation in which the Iranian Revolution took place. You had a situation of panic in the Saudi royal family, and subsequently there's been a huge propulsion of Wahhabism by the Saudi royal family. They have spent an amazing amount of money to promote a vision of Islam which is founded by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab about 300 years ago. Now, my mother converted to Islam. My father was a Hindu, so I decided to become a Buddhist. I decided to argue with neither of my parents, but be neutral. So I'm a Buddhist. I'm still a Buddhist. But the fact of the matter is that I read the Quran many times, because my mother, was there, and she used to read the Quran quite often. Always, the Almighty describes Himself as compassionate, as beneficent, as merciful. In almost every chapter of the Quran, you find the words, the compassionate, the beneficent, the merciful, when you talk about the Almighty. The Wahhabi version of the Almighty is quite different. There's no compassion. It's absolutely ruthless. There is no mercy. You're not forgiven at all. For any little transgression, even, showing your heel a little bit, you're not forgiven at all. You go straight to hell. And talking in terms of beneficence and all that, that doesn't exist. There's a certain ruthlessness. So it's a completely different concept of the Almighty from the concept that you read in the Holy Quran. As I have read in the Holy Quran, unfortunately what has happened is that a textbook is a great thing, and then the footnotes and the annexures are almost as important as the textbook. So what's happened since 1979, the footnotes and annexures that were extremely extremist have been added on to the Word of God, that is the Holy Quran. And these annexures and footnotes have been written by human beings, and they're pretty, if I may say so, pretty nasty in terms of dealing with other human beings. It's extremely negative about civilization, about society, etc., etc. You have a situation in which you hate the other, Now the other is anyone who's not Wahhabi. Women, for example, and minorities shouldn't have much in the way of rights. You're born a woman, that's God's decree, now you've got to suffer the rest of your life because of that. You're born a minority, non-Wahhabi, in a Wahhabi society, well, that is a huge mistake. It was deliberately made by God to punish you, and you're going to be punished for that. So it's unfortunately, it's not a vision of society that a person like me would feel very comfortable with. Now, at the same time, what happened in Iran? Now, Shia Islam has got, traditionally, Shia Islam is a very tolerant faith. It has a lot of introspection, a lot of dialogue, and people will think that Shia Islam, that is Khomeini Islam, and Shia Islam is different from Wahhabi Islam. The Wahhabis hate the Shia and vice versa. And genuine Shia Islam is definitely different from Wahhabi Islam. But the Khomeinist version of Shia Islam is very similar to Wahhabism. The Iranian mullahs have also got the same emphasis on hatred. It's not Can I like some other society? Can I work with some society? But these are, what are the societies that I should hate? What are the societies I should shun? What are societies I should fight? And instead of fight by using violence, by using various methods which I'm not going to describe here, but using that kind of thing. So from my way of thinking, Khomeini's version of Islam, that is what is Khomeini's version of Shia Islam, and the Wahhabi version of Sunni Islam, they're not, I mean, they're very similar to each other in terms of their fundamental characteristics. So we have, unfortunately what has happened is, there's been a partnership between the West and the Wahhabis. I mean, I would say that Saudi Arabia and what's happened in Saudi Arabia today is very much a creation of Great Britain, for example. I mean, it's played a very key role in ensuring that the current royal family came into power there. And I think they've been grateful ever since. But the fact of the matter is that during the battle against the Ottoman Turks, Wahhabism was seen as a counter to the Sufi Islam of the Turks. The Turkish way of Islam is not the case now. There's some kind of a change now. And I think what's happening in Turkey is a kind of what I would call, if you use an Americanism, Wahhabi light. Turkey is moving into a Wahhabi light direction. It's moving away from its Sufi and from its very moderate roots into a much more extreme form of Islam. But the Turkish Islam, Turkey had Jews, they had Christians, they had different kinds of people there, and they were living in perfect harmony with each other. If you go to Afghanistan, for example, Afghanistan is now seen as a synonym for intolerance, it's seen as a synonym for extremism. But till the 1980s, till I would say the middle of the 1980s, you had people in Afghanistan who were Afghans, who were Pashtun, who were Buddhist, who were Sikh, who were Hindu, and they functioned perfectly normally. They were treated extremely well, and they had a very good life in Afghanistan. There was absolutely no discrimination against them. The Pashtun is fundamentally a very moderate human being. What we see now in the shape of Taliban, etc., is the evolution of the Pashtun post the Afghan Jihad. It started in 1980, 81, 82, 83, continued throughout that period. But it transformed many Pashtuns from that kind of moderation. So you have the Bamiyan Buddhas being destroyed, you have the Sikhs being driven out, you have the Buddhists being driven out, you have the Hindus being driven out, and you have the moderate Sunnis being driven out. So today you've got a very fanatic vision of Islam. Largely because when the Afghan war started, there was a choice. I mean, not the British so much as the United States. And the choice was, you could choose Pashtun nationalists to fight the Russians, or you could choose Pashtun religious extremists to fight the Russians. The problem with choosing Pashtun nationalists is, I think you would have all heard of the Durand Line. I mean, there was a Durand Line because the British conquered a large part of that thing. And what they did to punish the Afghan king, they took about a third of his territory and integrated that in British India, which is now Pakistan. So a Pashtun nationalist says, there was a 100-year agreement or a 99-year lease, as in Hong Kong. At the end of that, it would revert back to Afghanistan. That lease expired about 20 years ago. But Pashtun nationalists, even today, want a united Pashtunistan. In other words, they want the Pashtun areas of Pakistan to join hands with them and form a united Pashtun state, inside Afghanistan or outside Afghanistan. So Pashtun nationalists were negative to Pakistan and to Pakistan's interest. So therefore, the Pakistan army put forward the idea that this jihad can be fought by religious extremists. The nationalists were people who welcomed Buddhists or whatever, they were moderate people. The religious extremists were completely Wahhabi, and the choice was made to outsource. I mean, the Americans are, Obama is very much against outsourcing, but outsourcing began way back by Carter and Reagan, by outsourcing the Afghan jihad to the Pakistan army. And as a result, the people who were armed were basically the fanatics and the fundamentalists, and not the moderate Pashtuns, who were nationalistic, who had fought the Russians, but who were not at all pro-Pakistani. So I think my personal view, as someone who has dabbled a little bit in all this, that is a very huge mistake that was made by choosing that kind of thing, but that mistake was made. So you have Wahhabism as a way of ensuring that you go against the Turks. You have a very extreme form of Islam the Turks are a soft Islam, so you convince people in the Arabian continent that Turkish Islam is not really Islam. The real Islam is what we, the Wahhabis, feel it to be. In the Afghan jihad, you have Wahhabism going against the Russians. And of course, you know, before that, in the 1950s, the 1960s, you had a lot of Arab nationalism. You had nationalism is a very healthy word in this part of the world, but somehow people here, when they use the word nationalism in Asia, they see it in a negative context as anti-Western. I don't think that's the case, because nationalism basically means you like your own country. And if you like your own country, and it may happen that working closely with the West is in the interest of your country, then a lot of nationalists are going to be friendly with the West, because working with the West would be in the interest of that country. So I don't think nationalism per se in Asia should be seen as a negative word. But the fact was, you had Gamal Abdel Nasser, you had Ben Bella, you had various other people in the Middle East who were Arabs, and who promoted this idea of a united Arab republic, of a united Arab state, and Arab nationalism. And this again was seen by some countries as a threat to their vital interests. And as a consequence, what happened was Wahhabism was allowed to be encouraged, and it was encouraged against this kind of nationalism. So Wahhabism has been, in a sense, a partner, if I may say so, and it ultimately has developed, as we know, into the kind of situation that we're seeing now, where for many decades now, the curricula in countries in the Arab world, the curricula in many countries in the world, the curricula in religious schools across many parts of the world, I hope not in Britain, but definitely in many parts of the world, it stresses a very exclusionary form of faith, in which one is seen as separate from the rest of the world. I mean, I would say, you know, we have gone a long way since the old days when you had racial supremacy. One race on top of the supreme over the others. Religious supremacy is as evil as racial supremacy. To say that one, you know, if you follow a particular faith, you're superior to somebody else, I think it flies in the face of the fact that we're all children of God. We're all children of the Almighty. And in India we call it Sanatan Dharma. What it means by Sanatan Dharma is multiple paths to the same objective. So I may have my own path, you may have your own path, everybody here has their own path, but it's all a path to the Almighty, and we're all children of the Almighty. So in that sense, the segmentation of people on the basis of faith, and especially saying that you're a lesser human being or a greater human being on the grounds of faith, is completely wrong. So that kind of a supremacy feeling has been bred in this kind of textbook, in this kind of thing. Now what's happening is, it's creating a culture in which it's very difficult for these people to adjust to the modern world. In the modern world, you need to work with different cultures. You need to work with different people. You need to be appreciative of, at least understand each other and adjust to each other. And if you don't have that kind of mindset, it's going to be very difficult to work in very many settings, in industrial or globalized or whatever. And this kind of an extremist mindset is spreading very, very rapidly because of the curricula, because of, I mean, frankly, you know, Vice Chancellor, I've seen a lot of money being spent on warfare, by NATO, in fighting wars. If a tenth of that money was spent on textbooks and things like that and changing curricula, I would say the results would have been far better, because it's the curricula, it's textbooks, it's our school students, it's our younger people that frankly are in need of being shown the kind of a moderate culture that was there in this region for a long time until the spread of Wahhabism, Khomeinism in the late 70s. So, I mean, I'm sorry for giving this kind of a vision of the world, because I travel quite a bit, and my own personal view is that this is exactly what's happening. And we have this kind of an exclusionary situation in which some people say that we are different, we're going to dress differently, we're going to act differently, we're going to talk differently from everybody else. That's fine. But don't hate the other. And don't regard the other as different from you or whatever, because we're all the same. Now, on the one hand, you have this Wahhabism community. On the other hand, you have a rise of an extremely powerful country. Now, I'm sorry, Vice Chancellor, for rambling a bit all over the place, but you know, I mean, the problem with us in India, we get warmed up in about 15 minutes. China. Now, long back, I mean, you know, I'm supposed to be an academic, so I have to occasionally come up with some theory to justify my reputation or my job as being an academic, my job as being a professor. I think the Vice Chancellor will also be very harsh on his professors. He'll keep asking them, have you written something? Have you written a theory? So one of my slightly far out theories was that the Chinese state is going to be pretty aggressive by around the year 2000, as definitely by around the year 2005, 2006. The rationale I put for that is that this is going to be the period when the Cultural Revolution generation and the one-child generation start taking over the top and higher middle positions in China. Now, you all know that in the 1960s in China, for about 10 years, there was something called the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. It was launched by Mao Zedong. It was launched with Lin Biao of the People's Liberation Army. And Mao's slogan was, bombard the headquarters. Your professors, your teachers, the high officials, anybody who's above you, challenge that person, fight him, bring him down, humiliate him, because, you know, an authority figure is a wrong thing. If you want to transform China, you have to break the authority figure. You have to break the Confucian mold of respect for authority. And the only way to do that is to bombard the headquarters. So there was for 10 years a very, very, very strong cultural revolution in China. Now the people who were teenagers at that point in time, who were in the cultural revolution, they have been taught in that 10 years to have utter contempt for authority. And if you look at the global world, what is global authority? What has been global authority for several hundreds of years? It's the Western world. If you look at institutions like the IMF or the World Bank or even the United Nations, and in the United Nations, for example, you have the French who have got a monopoly on the peacekeeping department, although they're very free to send their army all over the world, and they do send their army in all kinds of places, and they very peacefully drop bombs in Libya and various other places, but they're very active in peacekeeping. But, you know, the authority figures is the Western world. So when you're taught to challenge authority, geopolitically, what it means is you have to challenge the West. And you have to challenge the West in a very robust direction, the way you did as a red card. That's one. The second is the single child. Now, I don't know about the sociology here, but definitely the sociology in India. If you're an only child, and if you're a male child, you're spoiled silly. I mean, you know, these days in India we're civilized, whether the only child is a male or a female, they're both spoiled. You know, it's not just the male. But the male child is awfully spoiled. So in a Chinese family, you had a situation in which you're not allowed to have more than one child. You have male children, and you know, by some coincidence, almost the entire higher ranks of the Communist Party are still overwhelmingly male. So you have people who have been spoiled silly in their adolescence, in their youth, and taught to believe that they can get away with anything. So in other words, a complete lack of respect for what we call law or whatever, and a belief that what is important is get your own way no matter how. So as I said, you know, sociology was that these two generations are, if you track the age of these people, these two generations are going to reach the higher levels of the Communist Party by around the year 2001, 2002. And the single male child is going to reach the higher levels by around the year 2011, 2013. And these guys are trained to challenge authority. They are trained to believe that Mahatma Gandhi said that regarding means and ends, that means are everything. That if you have the wrong means, even if you get what you want to get, that distorts it, is not good. But for these people, the end is everything. The means are completely irrelevant. And that's the kind of, the spoiled children in India or China or whatever, that's the point that you have to say. And in that situation, China is going to be much more aggressive. Now, we have seen the South China Seas, we have seen other locations, etc. They're definitely a little more assertive, a little more aggressive. And if this paper I wrote is accurate, that's going to only become more and more prominent in the years ahead. So, this is the context in which you have, on the one hand, this kind of a Wahhabism, Khomenism situation. On the other hand, you have a very assertive China. And the question is geopolitically, how do we confront that?